What we're talking about in beginning to reach this non-dual state is to say, I embrace the force that's coming towards me as my teacher. Life hits us all with a 2x4. I totally agree with Andrew last night when he referred to the quick, I forget the language you used, but the quick and easy recipe to spiritual success and getting your swimming pools and whatever it is, that life has its tragedy for us all. It has its boulders it places in our path. This is reality. How do we meet those boulders not as our enemies, not as the things that defeat us, not that push us eternally into victim consciousness where we stay wounded, but that out of the wound we transform, we use that energy. It's a kind of aikido of life, that you take that energy of stress and use it as the creative basis for moving forward. And I affirm the deep pain, the deep hurt, the deep tragedy that I have witnessed on the planet. But that is not the place that should or can or needs to remain stuck. So how do we use stress as our teacher so that we finally come closer to the non-dual state? And I think there are many levels of non-duality in consciousness. But the beginning of that state that says, the very thing that wounded me was my teacher, was the beginning of my healing. The thing that I thought was negative was not so negative. When viewed from this higher state of consciousness, this more inclusive state that said, wow, how did you get here? How did you get to have such a radiant heart? How did you get to have such a healthy family? Because you were able to go through that wounding to a place of healing. And I will end, and then we'll take some questions. I think that's how it's going to go. When I was with the Seva Foundation, Seva is a Sanskrit word for service. In Amnesty International, I worked for 10 years in Amnesty International, and I had a cartoon on my desk. And the cartoon was of the two children in the woods. You know that, is it Hans Christian Andersen's story? The Wicked Witch and the two children and they're looking out of the window, and the witch is opening the door, with her long nose, and there's a lady, a little bit like Granny Breen, if you could imagine, with her black top and her black, tight black, and her umbrella and her handbag, of course. And the Wicked Witch says, "Oh, it's Amnesty International." Amnesty International is that sort of upright, moral conscience, who's being kidnapped here and who's... And I went from that reality to the Seva Foundation, which was founded by Ram Dass, who did, as you know, drugs at Harvard and became enlightened, and Wavy Gravy, who was the MC at Woodstock, who came to the board meetings walking a fish. It was a bizarre California from Washington, D.C. You get the picture. But the work of the Seva Foundation a lot of it was around blindness prevention in Tibet, Nepal, and India. And when I was in Nepal, I met a man who was about 70, 75, it was difficult to tell his age, who had been blind for about 40 years. And he had, through the Seva Foundation, cataract surgery and was able to see again. And they told me, the nurse told me, she said, this man, do you know what he did when his sight was restored? You get one of those Helen Keller, The sight is restored. What a magical moment. 40 years of being blind. You know what he did? You know what he said? He said, "Give me a stick. I want to beat the people who have been keeping this a secret." God himself came into the human being and gave the power to restore sight to the blind, and I had to wait 40 years for it? There are 16 million people in India alone who are blinded with cataracts. Should we get a stick to ourselves and say, what is going on? We could give sight to 16 million people, but instead we are distracted in distraction by distraction. That is the imperative. That is the reality. That is saying we have our spiritual work. We have this consciousness that we can arrive at. And we know we have our work to do. The work is obvious in terms of what we can achieve. And we can achieve it. We begin in that place of the holy fire of imagination and see the possibility is more than a daydream. It is a substance of the future that is calling us like a lover himself or herself. It is that real and that deep a substance. And we say, let me come to you. Let me create that future with you. Let me be in that place with you. That's going through the sacred fire of change to create the worlds of the future. Thank you.
James O'Dea, ladies and gentlemen. James O'Dea. James O'Dea.